Brian works with Fidelity Investments in Galway as a software engineer. And Brian is going to talk about DIY IoT and how you can create custom devices on a shoestring budget. Okay.
They're just my cheat sheets for when I get lost later. Hello everybody, my name is Brian Lough, and as mentioned, I'm a software developer with Fidelity Investments in Galway. I'm actually originally from Athlone, and I live here now, and I live here with my girlfriend Caroline and our daughter Sive. And tonight I'm going to talk about DIY IoT, and specifically using Arduinos. So this is my first time actually giving a talk like this, so I thought I'd look up online to get some tips or tricks. One of the things that I came across was to let the audience know what you do and how much experience you have with the topic, to give yourself some credibility. Well, in work, I'm a front-end developer, so nothing of what I'll be talking about tonight has anything to do with my day job. And I've actually only been looking at this for maybe the last 12 months or so that's pretty credible, right? So tonight I want to talk about how you can use DIY IoT to create a wide range of smart objects. I want to talk about what are some of its advantages over traditional IoT products. And I'm also going to give an example of how I use DIY IoT to legitimately solve one of the biggest problems facing Irish people today. Yes, that's pretty clickbaity, I know. But before we talk about DIY IoT, we need to lay down some foundations. First, we need to talk about what is IoT, what is it used for, and what are some of its challenges. And then we'll need to talk about Arduinos. What are they, and where do they fit into the IoT picture? As I mentioned, I've only been working on this stuff for maybe the last 12 months or so, but I'm really enjoying it, and I'm delighted to get the opportunity to share with you some of the things I've learned. So let's start with IoT. Most people in the room would be familiar with it, especially as it was already mentioned by Laura in the earlier talk, but it's actually less well known than you think. 87% of people asked in a recent survey had no idea what it was or what it stood for. IoT, or the Internet of Things, is simply connecting everyday objects or devices to the internet. And there was also some examples listed out earlier, like smart bulbs such as Philips Hue, or smart speakers that you can control with your voice, like the Amazon Echo, etc. The growth in IoT has been amazing over the last few years. ATMs were, I reckon, to be one of the first IoT devices, going online back as far as 1974. By 2008, there were already more devices connected to the internet than there are people on Earth. My facts and figures vary a little bit different from the first talk, but I think Cisco estimate that there will be 50 billion devices connected to the internet by the year 2020. This is kind of more to do with the 5G talk as well, but I thought it was an interesting fact, so I'd throw it out there. In 2011, 20 typical households used as much bandwidth as the entire internet did in 2008. Big companies are back in IoT. Amazon have already sold over 11 million Echo devices. Samsung bought the company SmartThings for $200 million. Google bought Nest for $3.2 billion. GE estimate that IoT will add $10 to $15 trillion to the global GDP over the next 20 years. And so where is IoT used? As mentioned in the first talk, it's used a lot in industry. This is the main place it's used at the moment. It's used to make smart wine, apparently. I didn't know that. But it's normally used to track processes and to keep status updates. The next two talks after me are about smart cities and self-driving cars. Both of these would involve IoT devices. And then obviously we've already talked about smart home devices, such as the Amazon Echo. But what are some of the challenges facing IoT at the moment? Security is obviously the big one. Distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS attacks, are when a hacker overloads a web server by generating a huge amount of traffic. This is kind of like if I rang your phone over and over again for a full day. If anybody is actually trying to get through to you, they'll find it very difficult because I have you engaged. So in September 2016, hackers using a malware called Mariah took control of over 150,000 unsecured IoT devices. They used these devices to generate over 1 terabyte per second of traffic and hit a DNS server with a denial of service attack, causing outages all over the world. More concerning from a personal point of view on security is that what if a hacker gets control of your IoT device? Even if it's not one that has a particular sensitive information on it or anything like that, there is now a device on your internal network that somebody else has control over. And then complexity is another issue. It's definitely not as big as security, but it's a major hurdle for IoT. It's not the complexity of how complex the object is in terms of how it works, but it's more how easy is it to use and how easy is it to set up? Could the average person set it up, bearing in mind that the average person is not a technologist? This is a major challenge for IoT device manufacturers because they need to try and make the device as easy to use as possible and to maintain. But they also need to consider security when they're developing the devices. Default passwords are the easiest thing from a setup perspective. Even if you lose the manual, you can just Google the password and it'll be there. But this is terrible for security. Those 150,000 devices I mentioned earlier, the major flaw with them was they shipped with default passwords and nobody changes them. And then compatibility. I think IoT devices work best when they work together. If you came to my house this Christmas, you better believe I was showing you how I could turn on my Christmas lights using my Amazon Echo. This was me issuing a command to the Echo, and then the Echo issuing a command to a smart plug. Now, the smart plug I was using was compatible with the Amazon Echo, but there are a lot of smart plugs that aren't. But I think compatibility is improving a lot, but it still has a long way to go. And then cost. As more and more of these devices become available, the cost of them will go down. But it's still a major investment for people. And is it worth the outlay? And then the last one is trust. We have to place a lot of trust in the device manufacturers. We trust that they'll use our data for only good and not evil. We also have to trust that they'll continue supporting the device, or even that they'll stay in business. While it's very unlikely that an Amazon will go out of business, this worry is not without precedence. There was a company called Revolve who got acquired by Nest in 2014. Just 2 years later, Nest decided to close the company down, rendering all their existing devices useless. And then there was another weird story in March in the States. I don't know if you saw it. A person bought and installed an internet-enabled garage door. He complained on the Amazon, he left a review on Amazon, it was probably a complaint, and he complained on the manufacturer's forums saying that the iPhone app kept crashing. And what was the company's response to this? They completely disabled communication between their servers and his door, meaning he couldn't use it anymore. This would be a good place to pause, I think. Okay, so what makes a good IoT device? Obviously not that garage door. But Samsung have a washing machine that's Wi-Fi enabled. They boast on their website that you can start and pause your wash and get notifications for when it's finished from their app. But how useful is this? Like, you still need to manually load the washing machine. So why wouldn't you just start it at that stage? And who pauses their wash mid-cycle? And why would you do it remotely? That makes even less sense. Maybe getting notified that your wash is finished is useful. I could see a use case for that. But this is a €1,400 washing machine. Is it really worth that to you? I think a much better example of a good IoT product is something like a smart thermostat like Nest. I do see the potential use case of when you're coming home from work, turning on the heat, or if you go on holidays and you forget to turn off your heat, just turning it off. But what if there was another device that we could think of? What if there was a smart alarm clock, that connected to the internet to get its time? You never would need to worry about setting the time for it because it'd always be right, and you wouldn't even need to worry about daylight savings. That's not really that useful because your phone does a great job of this already. But what if we built on it further? What if the alarm clock was connected to your calendar? It saw that your morning meeting got moved forward by 30 minutes and adjusted your alarm automatically. What if it also checked with Google Maps API and checked your commute time to work and adjusted your alarm accordingly for that too? I mentioned earlier that I thought I mentioned earlier that I thought IoT devices work better when they work together. What if your alarm clock, using this new information, could update when your home heating came on, or even if it could communicate with your coffee machine? I saw an ad a couple of weeks ago for Volvo, where the user turned on his Volvo using his Apple Watch to defrost the windscreen. But what if your alarm could check the weather and do that automatically if it needed? This device sounds pretty cool. I don't know if I trust it though. But as far as I know, it doesn't exist. So could we build one? That brings me on to my next point. What are Arduinos? Arduinos are an open source platform for creating electronics projects. It consists of both a physical board and the software on your computer used to write to the board. A microcontroller is a low-powered computer that just runs a single task over and over again. The programs for Arduino are written in C++ with a couple of custom libraries made by Arduino, and they're programmed using a built-in USB programmer on the boards, which is handy if you ever did microcontrollers in college. You were probably using an external programmer. There's several different boards available by Arduino, the most popular of which is called an Arduino Uno. But because the software is all completely open source, people have written libraries to get other microcontrollers working with the Arduino infrastructure. Interestingly as well, the hardware is also open source, so manufacturers can create complete replicas of Arduino boards. You can buy an Arduino board directly from a Chinese website for literally 1/10 of the cost of an Arduino board, and it'll work the exact same. There's a huge amount of different sensors, motors, LEDs, and screens that you can use to connect your Arduino to the outside world. These sensors such as that were mentioned earlier about the smart wine, like soil sensors and temperature sensors. You can get distance sensors and humidity sensors. These are also very inexpensive. One question I get asked a lot when I'm talking about Arduinos is it similar to a Raspberry Pi? And the answer is not really. But sure, both are small and both can be used to create electronics projects. But saying that they're the same is kind of like saying that your car and your bike are the same because they both have wheels and they both can get you to work. Your Pi is actually closer to your PC than it is to an Arduino. It runs an operating system the same way your PC does, while the Arduino just runs that one program over and over again. Arduinos use a lot less power than the Pi do as well, so they're better suited for running on batteries or running on solar power. They also have the ability to go into a low-powered mode for a defined amount of time. This is handy for if you want to build or do a periodic task, like measure the temperature every hour. Deciding whether you wanted to use a Pi or an Arduino for your project used to be a lot easier because the Pi was just so much more powerful and so much more capable. But the Arduino boards have improved a lot. I don't know if people are going to be able to see this now, but this is an ESP8266. It's a pretty terrible name. It's just rolls right off the tongue. But this was a game changer for me and my interest in this topic. This is a $3 board, and it's more powerful than the common Uno in every way. But the most interesting thing about it is that it has built-in Wi-Fi. I was amazed at what you can do with a $3 board. You can host your own web server on it, so you can connect to it from other devices. You can make external requests from it, including HTTPS ones. You can interact with JSON APIs. You can even host your own access point on it, so you can create your own networks. It also supports a lot of common web technologies, such as WebSockets or MQTT. I think one of the strongest assets that the Arduino has is its community. People are generally really helpful online with it. Even that Wi-Fi chip started out as an add-on board for more traditional ones, such as the Uno. The community saw the potential that it had and went about writing a library that they could use to, they went about writing a library so it could be used as a standalone device. There's a huge amount of information and documentation available for Arduinos online. If you Google pretty much anything and just add Arduino to it, it's very likely that somebody has already done it and they've documented how. What's also good about it is it's aimed for beginners, so it's a great way of getting young people interested in coding. But what do Arduinos have to do with IoT? As mentioned, IoT is about connecting everyday objects to the internet. Well, with a Wi-Fi enabled Arduino and all these different sensors that can be used to interact with the world, we can turn everyday objects into smart objects. And I'm going to give you an example of one of them now. So earlier, I made a bold claim that I solved one of the biggest problems in Irish society, or something like that. And it's not about water charges or anything like that, but it's a problem that all Irish households face, and it's the immersion. I don't know if any of the non-Irish people in the audience will be familiar with how big of a problem this is, but the immersion is almost like a curse word here in Ireland. I was actually just coming back from Dublin Airport at the weekend, and like famous Irish sayings were up on the wall, and one of them was, "Did you remember to turn off the immersion?" During the summer in my house, we don't need to use the oil heating anymore. We don't have an electric shower, so the only way we can heat the water is using the immersion. But our immersion is just like a light switch. There's just an on and an off. There's no timer or no boost. So we'd turn on the immersion and inevitably forget about it, and we'd rack up a big ESB bill. So I thought my first DIY IoT project should address this issue. I thought the device should have the following features. It should have a boost mode, so I could turn on the immersion, and after an hour, it would turn itself off. And I also wanted to be able to control the immersion remotely. So the first thing I needed to do was to be able to programmatically turn on and off the immersion using the Arduino. There are electrical switches called relays that you can get to control high voltage devices, such as the immersion in your house. But as this was a rented house, I didn't want to mess with the wiring in it. So I decided to take a more external approach. What I did was I 3D printed a custom mount for the switch, and I used a motor to physically flick the switch the same way that we would. Needs must, I guess. So once I had that done, I could just add a simple push button beside the switch that would be my boost. So it would turn on the immersion, and then an hour later it would flick it back off again. And then the next step was the remote control of it. I decided to use a service called Telegram. If you're not familiar with it, it's very similar to WhatsApp, but it allows you to create bots using a public API. So this was really useful for us last year. It's really handy to be able to send a message to your immersion when you're on your way home from football, or you're still in bed, and it made a big difference to our ESB bill. So this is the great thing about DIY IoT. It gives you complete control over the devices you make and the features that they'll have, once they're technically possible. And as I mentioned earlier, Arduino, with all their different sensors, the list of things you can do with it are almost endless. It also allows you to work on your devices iteratively. So you can create it and then see how the use cases are going. You might think of things that you didn't think of before. With the immersion switch, my girlfriend said, wouldn't it be handy if you wanted more hot water, that you could just leave the immersion on, and it would send you a message every hour to remind you, like a good Irish mammy. So this was just a simple change to the Arduino code, and it was done. I also said earlier that DIY IoT could address some of the challenges of more traditional IoT products. Security. You only need to expose the endpoints that you want to expose. You don't need to worry about remote configuration, remote firmware updates. There won't be any default passwords. Compatibility. As you are making devices, you can make them completely compatible with each other. And even because they're so flexible, you can integrate with existing products too. I mentioned earlier my Christmas lights. The smart plug I talked about was actually done using an Arduino. The Arduino mimicked the network traffic of a consumer smart plug that works with the Echo. And then complexity is another one too. It's a stretch probably to say that creating your own device is less complex than buying one off the shelf. But one thing you can do with it is you can tailor the user experience for the person that'll be using it. The immersion, for example, was you just opened the chat in the chat client and the bot gave you 3 options. There was an on, off, and boost. Couldn't be simpler. And then cost is another thing that it addresses. That immersion switch, the total cost of that was $10. If you ignore the fact I needed to buy a $350 printer. But I've already bought that now, so that'll go forward. Yeah, and then like the switch for the Christmas lights, the total cost of that was about $6. If you want to control your TV with your Amazon Echo, you need to buy an adapter from Logitech, which costs well over €100. Or you could build one with an Arduino and an IR LED, and it'd cost you about $5. Then trust. Your devices won't, or at least they shouldn't be, sending data anywhere you don't want them to be. And if support drops for your device, you've nobody to blame but yourself. The whole world is an API these days. There's so many different public APIs that you can integrate with that, as I mentioned, you can nearly do anything with these Arduino boards. I mentioned earlier about the alarm clock integrating with Google Maps or a weather service. There's libraries available for both of these things on the Arduino already. And if you come across an API where there isn't a library, it's a good opportunity to create it and give back to the community. And then to flip that around, these devices can become APIs and expose sensor data to other devices or to applications. So before I finish up, there's just one thing I'd like to say about it, that I often have hobby projects on the go. Over the last few years, I've worked on games and websites and even Telegram bots, but I've enjoyed working on the Arduino ones more than any of them. One of the things that I like about it a lot is that projects tend to be a lot smaller and shorter than traditional software projects, which is handy when you have an 8-month-old baby. The other thing that I really like about it is that there's something really amazing about taking a problem or an idea and creating a solution for it that interacts with the real world. I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. So I think the possibilities of what we can create with these devices are amazing, and I'm really excited to see what we can do with them. I'd like to thank everybody for organizing this event, and if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. One of the 3 people I know in this room has their hand up. Hi, Owen.
Hi, Brian.
This better be a nice question.
Probably not. You mentioned earlier the compatibility. Do you fear seeing how the likes of Office applications have become so proprietary that they'll end up being big players in this sort of space with proprietary APIs?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. Like, if you want to take an example of like Google, they own the biggest smart thermostat, and they're now making a big push for a smart speaker with their Google Home. I'm not sure if it's available in this side of the pond yet. But I think if people kind of vote with their feet, like as in most people when they see an Echo, they ask it like, oh, Echo, tell me a joke or whatever, and they get kind of tired of that pretty quickly. But when they see it integrating with actually something potentially useful, like we did actually use it to turn on and off the Christmas lights all the time because the light, it was in the corner and we didn't want to bend over or whatever. So yeah, I think it's important that people vote with their feet and buy the things that are compatible with each other, or do the Arduino route and build your own.
Hi, I was just wondering, did you actually consider any more low-tech solutions to your immersion problem? Like, maybe you could ask the landlord to put in an electric shower.
Yeah.
If that failed, you could actually move your mommy back in with you, and she could remind you
when I made the immersion switch, my girlfriend was pregnant, so we were making our own Irish mammy in the house. I'm very happy with the house, and I really don't want to rock the boat with the landlord, so I didn't really feel like asking him. And also, where's the fun in that? Like, I don't know, there's something weird about being able to text your immersion switch and physically flicking it. I didn't consider asking the landlord. I'm also a bit too shy. Thanks, guys.